Jeez. Okay. That caught me by surprise. I was somewhere else then. I'll be sensible now. How do we start?
We say this is Literary Roadhouse.
Wait, did I lose Gerald?
I don't know. He looks frozen for me.
He looks frozen for me. This is Literary Roadhouse, though.
This is Literary Roadhouse. Gerald's supposed to say that line today.
Yeah.
Frozen. For a minute there, I thought I was the problem child because you were so still, Andy, that I thought you had frozen too.
Oh, I'm unfrozen.
Yeah. Did he come through very briefly sighing in a robotic voice?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
so. Hey, we read one short story once a week.
Yeah, we do. And we discuss it. I like when we have guests because they bring stories that have been pre-vetted. And go out in the wild and don't pre-vet a story. Good things can happen. We can be surprised. We can discover a little-known author. We can discover a little-known magazine. But also, we can discover someone that I hate. So actually, that's strong. I shouldn't say that I hate, but someone who's like, it's just, I would rather read something a guest told us to read. Yeah, I guess it's coming back. Yeah. Actually, I kind of feel like sometimes when there's an author whose story, I've only read their one story and I didn't like it, sometimes I feel so guilty about it that I feel like I owe it to that author to read something else by them to see if I do like it. But then that guilt never manifests into action. So,
do you feel guilty about this story?
I do. I feel very guilty.
I don't.
Oh, good.
I understand that impulse, but I feel like I don't want to read anything this guy's ever written.
I want to read his stuff in McSweeney's. Gotta do the vibe. I've never read something in McSweeney's I didn't like. Because it's,
First time for everything.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I shouldn't say I've never, but Also, have you ever heard of Gia Tolentino?
No.
Yeah, so Gia is probably not going to watch this, but if you do, Gia, I love you. You're my role model. She's a writer. I first discovered her on Jezebel. She's also written for The All and other stuff like that. She's at the New Yorker now. She does really good essays. And she's just a really good modern thinker, mostly about feminist issues, but not just. So I'm reading this book that she published earlier this year called Trick Mirror, and it's a series of essays. It's just her thinking about stuff. And the last one I read was about drugs and religion and hip hop. So good in one essay together.
What happened then?
I don't know. You froze. So we started talking about the problem with reading blindly.
Yeah, and I got all three of my little windows had a wiggly gig on it, whirring round and round, and I sent a message on Slack, and that didn't go. But I was still connected.
I don't see anything on Slack. Wiggly gig is the official term for a low icon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we take it from the top. The little conversation Andy and I had bonus content.
What is Literary Roadhouse?
Let me finish my coffee first.
All right. Enjoy it.
Well, then we'll continue to do bonus content. Going in on minute 4 soon.
Okay. Here we go. If I can remember what to say. See, it's come back to me now that maybe my brain's connected to the internet or something, so that when my internet dropped out, I couldn't remember how we start the podcast. That's a bit weird.
We skipped one weekend.
I know. It's all gone to pot. Okay. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Andy.
And I'm Anais. And I'm going to try to not talk too much this week because you know what they say, if you have nothing nice to say, you should say nothing at all. No, I shouldn't say I have nothing nice to say. I have nothing that doesn't sound backhanded. Okay, Gerald, what have you been?
Yeah, Gerald, tell us about the story you picked. And you picked it.
I just wonder what was going on then. Just take over, why don't you? And
remember chit chat, casual chit chat.
Yeah. And this week we've been reading a great story called, well, I think it's all right. It's called The Enchanted Forest by Brian Crawford. If you haven't read the story yet, and you should, pause the podcast, read the story, and then come back. So with this lovely little story, we're with two brothers at a mountain fire station in California at the time of the Vietnam War. They receive a call that a tree is on fire up the mountain somewhere. Roy, the elder, drives the water tanker up the precarious tracks until they arrive near to the tree. During the journey, we learn about their lives, their backstory, and the fact that Roy is expecting a call up to fight in Vietnam. And at the end, we find out that Tommy, the younger brother, has received his call-up papers. Instead of putting the fire out, Roy takes his chainsaw and chops the tree down, which only spreads the fire into the dry brush in a ravine. They decide to leave it and head back to the tanker. What's going to happen? Who knows?
For a story you think's all right, that's a pretty mocking tone in a summary.
See,
Well,
Gerald, I've noticed this about you. When we say something's bad and then you say it's all right, you immediately turn on it.
I'm not turning
it's
on
all
it.
right. And then you spend 20 minutes making fun of it.
I'm not turning on this. I think it's a fine story. I don't think there's anything
All
too
right.
much wrong with it.
These are the words you've used. All right, fine, and little.
Oh, it's not, you know, it's not going to win any Booker prizes for short stories. Not that there is a thing, or a Pulitzer or anything like that. It's, you know, we ain't talking, you know, top of the shop literary fiction here.
Why not? What's missing?
Oh, blimey! Defend the story, Gerald. Why don't you? What's missing? Well, what's missing? I mean, we've got a bit of subtext. We've got a bit of backstory. We've got a bit of a little bit of theme. So we're just missing what you might expect from a literary short story, and it's more. It's I don't know. You tell me what's missing.
Oh, I have strong opinions on what's missing. There's a lot of things not missing, but the things that it's not missing don't matter. Like it's doing the things that you are taught to do really well, right? It's cutting all the fat. The prose is tight. The dialogue is tight. It's combining, like, you know, you've got like the drama of the fire that has like a nice parallel to the drama between the brothers. And as things heat up on the fire side, the emotional turmoil deepens between the brothers. It even does that thing where, like, while you're driving, great chance to do flashbacks, right? Like, there's a lot of things about it that's just, this is how you put together a story that are technically good or fine, but the way, to me, and this is so mean, but it just felt, and it's so mean, and I'm so sorry if Brian Crawford reads. Actually, Brian Crawford, stop watching this.
Yeah.
Okay, just stop watching. It felt soulless. It felt dispassionate, empty. Like, even though as I'm watching it, I can see what's happening, at no point was I sort of like induced to care. And I never felt like the narrator who's telling me the story cared. That's my biggest complaint. There was a big amount of, this is somebody who knows what they're doing, but doesn't seem to care about it in the story. That's how it felt to me. And that's what made it so disappointing, which is harsh as hell. Brian Crawford, if you're still here, I don't know, send me something you're really passionate about and I'll read that. Okay.
I think that is harsh, and I think that is too harsh. And I think you're,
tell me I'm wrong.
And I think, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just saying I think you're being overcritical of, you know, what is, I think, a pretty good story. I enjoyed reading the story. I enjoyed reading it each time I read it. So that's not a bad thing. You know, maybe it's not, you know, as I say, maybe it's not the peak of literary short fiction, but it's okay.
Is this a story you're ever going to reference again? Like, are you going to remember this story in 2 weeks?
It's a very good question, and yes, but there is a reason for that, and that comes on to the quiz at the end of the show. So,
so you're going to remember it because you came up with a hilarious quiz. Got it.
Ouch. Oh, no, it's no, because there's something I'm writing that has a connection to this and has a connection to the game and other stuff. So yeah, it's strange really that this came up, and I didn't really, I've definitely I read about the first paragraph, didn't understand it before I chose it, so I didn't know what it was about, and it sort of fits into what I'm doing myself at the moment. So
all right. So is this like a Slumdog Millionaire situation where, like, yeah, the story's garbage, but it happens to slot specifically into something you're tangentially interested in, and so now it appeals to you?
As I say, and I repeat, I wasn't aware of what the story was until I read it about 2 or 3 hours ago. So it is kismet. It is happenstance that it fits into what I have been doing for the past 2 or 3 weeks. So, and also, it's a good story. It's a good, I don't know. It's better than some of the stories we've had on here.
I feel like what you're saying is what I'm saying, just in a kinder way. It's the sense that it is technically put together in the way that a good story should technically be put together. And yet you can't find yourself inspired to say anything more than that, which I think is my frustration. Andy, what did you think of the story?
Not much. Like, that's what I thought of the story. Not much. I feel like Vietnam has to do all of the emotional lifting for the entire story. Like,
that's a good point.
Saying the word Vietnam has to carry everything. And like, it's not like the story was about the Vietnam War directly, or that the story belabored the point about Vietnam. They brought it up, I think, the appropriate amount of times, but there's no other emotional payload.
I wish they would have talked about it a little bit more. Not the war itself, not what was happening over there itself, but just like it made me think about, there was one line that Roy had towards the end that did make me think a little bit, and I wish he would have belabored this point, or I wish this would have been the theme that was being explored, which was you can't just let life happen to you. He wants Tommy to find a way to get it deferred, and there's a point that I was like, I never really thought about too deeply the fact that there really isn't much for Tommy to do. That Tommy's resignation is sad, that he is completely defeated, and I've usually lived my life in a way where I never want to be resigned to anything or defeated, where I want to definitely take my own life by the horns. But people who got drafted in NAM did not have that choice, unless we're wealthy enough to like literally defend. So it's just like that. I wish that frustration would have come through a little bit more. That would have been an interesting theme for a modern reader, because we haven't had a draft in the United States for so long. The way that we think about our military is so different than it probably was back then when there was a draft. Everyone that goes now either is going because of class inequality and there's no better options for them, which is sad, or they've always wanted to. They love it. They've always, you know what I'm saying? Like they believe in the narrative of the U.S. military and what it does. So you either have people who are fully on board, or it's their one way out of poverty, which is a different way to think about it than when it was a draft. That would have been a cool thing to explore, but that's not really what was explored too much. I did that thinking on my own.
Right.
Yeah. But you're right. Nam does all the heavy lifting in a way that felt, again, empty is the way to put it. I'm just going to mention a tragic war thing.
Right.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of other stuff there. There's a lot of family stuff there. There's a lot of how life is treating the two brothers differently. Yes, Nam is the backdrop and the fear of the draft and the call-up. But as Andy said, it's mentioned the reasonable number of times, so it's not over-labored. It's there, but it's not. It's just the background to it. So I think, there's equal amount of stuff about the father's drinking, and I don't know.
There is, but like the stuff about the father's drinking felt like the exact same thing. It was Yeah, this father, but like, even with the alcoholic father, it's like a checkbox. It didn't do anything. It didn't make me feel any way the way it was written.
That's exactly how I feel.
Like, this could have been a story about dealing with an alcoholic parent, and also with a Vietnam draft, and
but it wasn't a story about that, and that's,
and what was it about?
Right, that's the. It's about them.
It was about a lot of things. I think
shittily putting out a fire.
I think it's about a lot of things. It's about life, which is not one particular thing. It's about life, which has lots of things that affect what you do and how you do it and what happens to you and how you live your life. So I think it's a true reflection of life that these things are there in the background, and in the foreground we've got this climb up the mountain to put a fire out badly, as you say.
Bad. Quite poorly. Yeah, but I feel like in life all of those things have emotional resonances, and here they're mentioned, they're listed.
Yeah, but then I think if they had delved into the emotional resonance of either of those things, I think it would have become a cliche, because it would have been, then using that as a narrative to carry the story, and we've all, it's like using it's like using racism or as something that is intertwined in the story, or as something which is the story. And I think if it's intertwined in the story, then I think it works better then, rather than being about that one particular thing, because we've read 1,000 stories about racism, and I think it works better when that, or the alcoholism, or the draft, is then worked into the story of these two brothers.
Yeah, I feel like this is a weird middle ground between those two things. Like, you're absolutely right. There could have been a weird, overwrought Vietnam draft story that would have also been bad for different reasons. This one's not that, but it didn't
run the risk of being that.
Right. It didn't go the other way either. It didn't work it in a way that is meaningful or insightful or.
Okay.
I keep thinking about a story we read a few years ago called Strays, which had the two brothers. Their mom keeps sort of like running away all the time. Their dad has to go after her. So their uncle, who's an alcoholic and a bit of like a gambler, he's watching them. And it's a story of how these two brothers navigate the chaos that is their, sort of, if I remember, it was like kind of like low income, dysfunctional home, parents who seem to break up, get back together, a mom who abandons them often, and an uncle who isn't the best influence, but is one of the few role models in their lives. And that could have become overwrought, but it wasn't. And it wasn't just naming these things like a check mark. It was actually exploring the way that these two brothers navigated that together. And it was younger brothers as well, not even adults. And I feel like when you have adults, you can have a certain amount of awareness and introspection that feels false with children. So it's even harder with children, I think. I feel like that's a great contrast. Read Strays. Let me figure out who it was. Like that, I think I remember liking Strays quite a bit. Who was it? It was Strays by Mark Richard, episode 78. Oh, Gerald, the notes, you found the feminist message too heavy-handed. That was Miss Temptation. I scrolled down too far. No, I scrolled down too far. No. Like this one. Gerald and Ace were over the moon with the clever writing. It's a bleak story of poverty, abandonment, alcoholism, and desperation. Anyway, there is a way to talk about these things, and we've read other stories that talk about pretty similar to what we're seeing here. And there's a way to do it that doesn't make it feel like you're ticking boxes, which was one of the things that I said in Slack. It felt like, oh, brothers, alcoholism, poverty, rural living.
It's a story now.
Right. Tell me something about it. what is your point of view? Because there's a bunch of authors who can write about alcoholism and its effects on two brothers growing up in a poor household, and you will walk away with a different point of view every time if the authors care about the subject they're writing about.
Okay.
Anyway, I wouldn't be mean, but I couldn't help it. I'm so disappointed.
Yeah, it's a shame, and it's kind of strange that we disagree on this because I don't think it's that bad a story. I think maybe it's because I do tend to quite like stories that have a style of writing that I enjoy, which is the Carve magazine typically. So maybe it's that and make me enjoy it. I don't know.
And I think that's fair. It definitely has a style. And it is a style that is overrepresented in Carve. And I have liked Carve stories before that use this style. So, like, I guess I'm style agnostic. This style could or could not have worked for me. It's not the style that's pissing me off.
Yeah. Okay.
You know?
Yeah, but if you like the style, that's a point in its favor, I suppose.
It is. Yeah.
There was, now that we've made fun of it for a bit.
Yeah.
There was one line I really liked that I was hoping would be like the central theme of the story, and I don't know that anything was. But while they're driving up to the thing, Roy's like, he was just doing what was asked of him. I mean, the narrator's like, but of Roy. He was just doing what was asked of him. He saw things through, always had. But maybe, he thought, that was the damn problem. I like that sort of sentiment that, like, obviously this guy's a screw up, but he's not a screw up from slacking off or not trying. He sets out to accomplish the tasks he tries to accomplish, and things just don't go right.
And that could be a cool theme to explore, because I can think of people that I have seen where it's like they fall short of the goals that they set for themselves. Because sometimes because of circumstances, sometimes because of their own failings as a human. That'd be a cool story.
Yeah. But yeah, it didn't quite do enough with that. And like it's there, and that's kind of the idea. Like he set up the stupid archery thing, even though the guy was broke, and then that didn't get him any money, so they're still out of luck. And he went to school, but it wasn't quite enough. He didn't quite finish on time. He doesn't have exactly enough money. He's fighting a fire, but he's not good at it.
Can't drive.
Or like he's trying. He's not like a screw up who went up there like a joker to like, well, just throw water on it like a jerk. He's like, well, here's the things I know how to do. Let's do our best.
Right. Yeah. That would have been a good story.
Yeah. A story focused around that line.
So harsh.
Which Brian Crawford did indeed write that line.
Yes, he did. Because Brian Crawford knows what he's doing. I don't read the story and think I'm in the hands of an amateur at all. That's not what's happening, you know. It's the lack of passion, you know. Like I can't criticize the technique, the way that anything is set up, the prose, the way that he draws the characters. He knows what he's doing.
That's one of the things I was trying to search for before we started recording was like, who is this Brian Crawford guy? Also, there's a ton of Brian Crawford authors.
Yeah.
I searched through like 3 of them. One of them's a guy in Georgia who writes about the Rwandan genocide. And I was like, oh, is that the same Brian Crawford? Like, that's kind of he writes about Vietnam and Rwanda? No, different guy. But yeah, I found him. And what I was trying to figure out is if he's old enough to have deep personal opinions about the Vietnam War. And maybe that would make the story better in a way. I don't have a firm answer, but looking at his picture, I don't think he is.
You see, I think there's a danger here that you then you're straying into territory where authors shouldn't write about things they don't know about personally. And if there was not enough depth and emotion based around the Vietnam War and the draft and that sort of thing, then perhaps I can see that you would think that having not been in that position, then they wouldn't have if they'd have been in that position, they would have been in more emotional sort of turmoil and more emotion in the story around that draft and the fear of the draft being brought to their house. So yeah, I can see that.
And I suppose, right, you don't want to say authors can't write about things they haven't personally experienced. But
exactly.
But if the story was better, I wouldn't have cared. If the story was better, like if you're gonna write about something like that, write it better.
And Gerald brings up a good point that not having lived through it shouldn't people makes a difference. And that's making me think of The Sympathizer, which we read for the book club, Viet Thanh Nguyen, who, he's Vietnamese, but I don't think he was alive during the war, or he was very young. And what he wrote about it felt so specific and researched, and all the different factions he looked into, the different kinds of characters that could exist and the different points of views, which you don't get when you include Nam as a checkbox, right? You know what I mean? Or you know what? Checkbox isn't even the best way to put it. It could have been Nam. It could have been World War II. It could have been anywhere where there was a draft, and it wouldn't have made a difference, which is fine if you're talking about the draft, but then talk about the draft. Talk about the war, then talk about the war. And it's not clear. You know what I'm saying? I think that's where we get that feeling of like, okay, why Nam?
Well, see, I felt like Nam was specific, but it was specific not because of anything he wanted to say about people or Vietnam era America, but it's because it's like a shorthand. Like, so theoretically, you can have a just war.
Right.
And pretty much we can say now, looking back, the idea is Vietnam was not that.
Right.
So if you want to just very easily say, oh, they have to fight, and don't worry, it's not a just war.
True. Yeah.
Then you just say Vietnam.
Right. Right. It is a shorthand. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Anything else that we should say? Because I feel like I'm just going to keep saying negative things. So the only positive things I have to say are the story was well constructed. That wasn't enough. That's not really a nice thing. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adequately
written. We've read that weren't as well constructed, but I like so much what the author was thinking about that I gave him a pass. Right? If you give me an interesting thing to think about, and that's just me as a reader, I'll forgive a lot of like garbage characters and bad dialogue if the theme being explored is interesting enough.
Okay.
But that's just that's again tastes, personal tastes.
Yeah, and I think that's the strange thing about this podcast is that there's such a strong negative reaction to something which I think, yeah, it has its issues, and as I said, it's never going to be up there amongst the best of literary short fiction, but I felt it was an interesting story. It explored some things against a backdrop of the time and the place. So, but yeah, it's as you say, it's and
you're right. It is strange to have such a strong negative reaction to a story that is essentially fine. And maybe it's because it is essentially fine that I'm so frustrated. It's like, you should know better. I can tell you.
Right. If it's this technically proficient,
right?
Why does it not also have
a soul? Yeah. Yes. That's the frustration. It's like, I know you're better than this.
Wow.
It's true though.
Okay.
Which I know is hard. I know it's hard because, if you're trying to make your life as a writer, sometimes you also just need to write stories to get paid. So like, I get it. Not every story can be singing from the heart. Like that's the reality of this high content world that we live in. Like, it's unless you're like writing novels and you do one every few years. But if you're writing a lot of short stuff, you have to constantly churn to like survive in the current structure or world that we have in. And I don't think that makes you necessarily a salad or anything like that. Like, you're trying to live your life as a writer so that you don't have to do something that you don't love, right? Like, I get it. So I understand there's also a crazy demand from me to be like, listen, I know you're technically good, but I want you to make my heart sing as well. Like, I understand outside of my bubble. It's a little bit like, hey, I also need to just like produce a lot of content because that is literally my job. So like, I get it. That's the way that things are set up right now. The internet moves fast.
Yeah.
Survives a few weeks, then dies. So I get
It's
it.
true.
But this is the
But we also read a lot of short stories here.
We do. We read a lot of short stories, and I like when my heart sings.
Yeah.
So there's that.
There you go. Well, I reckon it's time to rate then, because we're not going to say much more about this. I'm going to go 5. I was going to go 4.5, but I do like how it's put together and how it's structured and how it's written. So yeah, it's a 5 because there wasn't enough emotion and subtext and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Andy?
I'm going to give it a 2, but for exactly the same reasons Gerald gave it a 5.
Ouch.
It's yeah, I liked all the elements in it theoretically, and it didn't do anything to me.
Yeah, I'm a little more generous with a 3, right down the middle. Big old shrug, even though I wasn't shrugging. I can't help it. I can never say anything in a blasé way. I can only be excited or disappointed. I only operate on the extreme frequency.
Mediocre is not a word in your dictionary.
No, but apparently it is in my ratings because of 3.
Right.
Truly
mediocre. There you go. Okay, so that was that. So we won't go to Carve for a while.
I feel really bad. I feel so bad. No, there's stories I've liked from Carve, but maybe we should pre-vet them.
Oh, harsh.
Just
Okay.
saying.
So what stories are you going to put up for next week then, Anais?
Okay, well, I am going to assume no risk here by submitting what our guest Caitlin Hamilton submitted, which is last week, well, a few weeks ago, but didn't win, which was The Rabbit Matchmakers by Andrew Phillips. So I take no risk. This has been vetted by Caitlin.
Wow.
Yeah. You like that?
We'll see.
What about you, Andy?
I'm going to submit The Bunty Club by Tessa Hadley.
Okay. What's this awesome game we've been talking about, Gerald?
Yeah, Gerald, I hear you got a game.
Yay.
Awesome game.
Awesome game. You're going to hate it. But I don't care because you hated my story. So that's I'm getting that home back now. Yeah. The game is right. So I thought about, they're in a forest and in California, story about game about California or forest or I don't know. And then I thought, well, there's a fire in a forest, and that's a pretty can be a pretty cataclysmic episode. So we've got a quiz about disaster movies.
Ooh.
Yay. And it's not multiple choice. So you're going to have to get it from the clue. So there.
Okay.
Okay.
That right now.
So Anais and Andy.
Just give it to Andy.
Because they're in sort of pairs, which is quite interesting.
Okay.
Released in 1998, this is to Anais. Released in 1998, Mimi Leder's film was a sensitive, emotional attempt to look at the tragedy of a giant asteroid strike, starring Vanessa Redgrave, Robert Duvall, and a young Elijah Wood.
Oh, yeah. 1998?
Yep.
I can't do what I'm thinking. Was that Deep Impact?
It was Deep Impact. Excellent. Yes. Well done. Andy, also in 1998, we've got a film from Michael Bay. which features an asteroid and stars Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck, and Billy Bob Thornton.
And Peter Stormare is the Russian cosmonaut. That's Armageddon.
That is Armageddon.
Those movies did come out as a pair.
Yes, they did.
I was just thinking, there's a lot of these.
Yeah,
there are a lot. Well, there's 7 rounds, so we're all right. We got plenty of time. 2004 film starring Dennis Quaid, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Emmy Rossum. Anais. 2004. Dennis Quaid is the key thing. A great climate-based disaster movie.
That's The Day After Tomorrow.
That's The Day After Tomorrow. Oh, good. I'm
better than I thought.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, Andy.
This one where Absolute Zero chases them.
Yes. And I'm going to Mexico. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. 2009, Andy. John Cusack and Woody Harrelson. Solar storms are threatening the Earth this time.
Oh, man. No, I don't know it.
It's 2012. Okay, so
I have a trailer for it.
I could see the poster of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, let me just sort this out. Okay, so Anais, 1974. Charlton Heston, Ava Gardner, and George Kennedy. Based in Los Angeles, this tells the story of various interconnected people and a natural disaster.
Earthquake?
Yay!
Wow.
Very good. Earthquake. Okay, Andy, 2015, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I can't say that name.
What's its title?
Yeah, I remember it.
Attempts to find his daughter, who is trapped in Los Angeles during a natural
hot daughter.
disaster.
Oh man, it's got a goofy title. It's something like Aftershock. No. Nah.
No. San Andreas.
San Andreas.
I guess it's a city. It's a city. Sand, but not a famous sand.
Okay, so
named after the fault line.
The other way now. Annie's 2018. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is a security expert trying to infiltrate a tall building on fire and rescue his family trapped by criminals.
Oh yeah, this is Die Hard, but with The Rock.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot the title of this. I can again see the trailer.
I think it's Aftershock.
Is this Aftershock? No. No, what is this? I don't know. I can't remember.
Is it about how tall the building is?
No. A tall building. This is Skyscraper.
Yeah, see, it was about how tall the building was.
Yeah.
So, Andy, 1974 film. Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. A very tall building on fire.
Oh, no, that's about water. Inferno?
What sort of inferno?
Oh, is it a raging inferno?
No.
Blazing inferno?
It's towering inferno.
Towering inferno.
Damn.
Awesome. Very good film. And we've got 3 more rounds, you'll be pleased to hear. Anais, 1972. Gene Hackman and Ernest Borgnine are dealing with a cruise ship which turns upside down.
Never heard of this. A cruise ship.
Guy from McHale's Navy?
1972.
I don't know. Capsized. I'm just making stuff up.
It's called The Poseidon Adventure.
Oh. Never heard.
And in 1979, Andy, adventurers return to the good ship Poseidon to seek several fortunes, starring Michael Caine, Sally Field, and Telly Savalas. What's the exact title? It's not Poseidon 2 or anything.
Is this The Return to the Poseidon Adventure?
I'm going to give you that. It's Beyond the Poseidon Adventure.
Beyond the Poseidon.
Very good.
Oh, you didn't cover Twister and Tornado, my 2 favorite disaster movie films.
We still have rounds. What coming up?
I thought you said that was the final one.
No, I have 2 more rounds.
Good. Cover Twister and Tornado.
Shut up. Annie's, damn. Annie's, 1997, Pierce Brosnan with a terrible English, Irish, American accent, and Linda Hamilton are in danger not from a Terminator, but from lava and fire bombs from a mountain. 1997.
Oh, yeah. It's one of two movies.
Yeah, I know, but it's not the more recent Kid Harington Pompeii, is it?
No.
No.
This is the one.
Not, but
This is the one that doesn't have Tommy Lee Jones in it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I can't think of the title.
This is Dante's Peak.
Oh.
It's a good film, but he's a terrible actor. He's a terrible actor in this anyway. Andy, also in 1977, certain Mr. Lee Jones and Anne Hesh are in danger from lava and firebombs from a mountain.
Mm-hmm. This is the one whose title I don't remember. It was Dante's Peak and Volcano?
Volcano is correct.
Damn.
Whoa, level pegging. 3
and 3. Well, you gave him that freebie with Poseidon, but it's fine. Here we go. Final round.
Okay. So, Annie's, 1996, Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton
Twister.
have a problem with the wind, and it's Twister. Andy,
Bruce Campbell's in this one.
In 2000, George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg have a problem with the wind.
Gerald, I think you also mean and Bruce Campbell. Because it's Tornado with an exclamation mark. No?
George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg.
What are they in? Another Twister type of... Oh, Storm Chasers.
There's 3?
No? Isn't there one where they're like chasing storms? Maybe that's not George Clooney.
It's slightly different. It's The Perfect Storm.
The Perfect Storm.
The Perfect Storm.
Oh, I did see that one. I just forgot it.
No one saw that one.
I did.
They're all busy watching the Bruce Campbell movie, Tornado.
I saw it several times.
And I don't think Bruce Campbell and George Clooney have ever been in a movie together.
Have you forgotten about...
Oh, dear.
Serving Sarah?
Yes, I've never heard of that.
Well...
But Mary...
Oh, no, Intolerable Cruelty. George Clooney wasn't it. Matthew, the guy from Friends, was in Serving Sarah. Intolerable Cruelty. George Clooney and Bruce Campbell.
Bruce Campbell's in that one?
Yeah. He plays a soap opera actor.
Wow, what a role. Okay.
Well, that's the end of the quiz. The tiebreak was going to be how many acres were burned in the campfire of 2018 in California, in which 85 people died.
A lot.
And that was 153,000 plus a few acres, which is a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, officially a lot. Okay, so Annie's won the quiz. So what are we reading next week?
We're reading The Rabbit Matchmakers by Andrew Phillips. But before you go, ignite a fire of discussion in our Facebook group, The Literary Roadhouse Readers, or on Twitter @LitRoadhouse, or our website, literaryroadhouse.com. But probably Facebook, that's where most people do it. All right. If you haven't already, please leave a review on iTunes. It really helps our podcast family stay afloat, like Roy and Tommy's family. Okay. Lastly, we've decided a fantasy-themed amusement park will drive exactly the kind of revenue that will take the show to the next level. Support our amusement park and our podcast expenses at patreon.com/Literary Roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the stewardess whose hair always smells like coconuts. Until next time, read a good story.